first things first, I'm gonna go ahead and say that I love royz. I love Subaru. The first time I watched the Lily music video, I was 14 years old. I looked at the music video, I saw it, I looked at him, I pointed at the screen and said, I want to be him. And I did. I did cosplay him and I was him. And since then, I've just kind of fallen in love with Subaru. Not really in love, but I just really liked him a lot. But I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw a tweet that was about a book that was supposedly someone's self-published royz Subaru fan fiction. The people in the replies were just going at it. They were just saying like, oh my god, this is like so bad. Like, who wrote this? Why is this here? And I kind of forgot about it for a little bit. I just went ahead and like I quote tweeted it and said, oh my god, and I thought I was obsessed with Subaru. Because let's be honest, I really am.
I am disgusted.
So I decided to buy the book for myself, read it, and see if it was actually as bad as people in the replies thought, or if it's somewhat good. When I bought this book, I thought it was going to be like a short story, maybe a couple hundred pages. This thing is 648 pages long. 604. Now before I continue, I'm obviously going to say that this isn't meant as any like hate or anything towards the author or the book itself. I'm just sharing my opinions and some of the thoughts I had while reading it. So without further ado, here we go. So this book is called Visual Kei Rockstar. It's by a woman named Cherie McCarver. And a lot of the reason why people thought that this book was actually about Subaru royz, it's not confirmed, but it was, ooh, shiny. It's not confirmed, but it was speculated that it was about Subaru royz because A, one of the main characters' names is Subaru, and B, it's a Visual Kei musician. Subaru royz. royz is a Visual Kei band that originated in Osaka in 2009. It originally consisted of 4 members: Subaru on vocals, Kazuki on guitar, Kodai on bass, and Tomoyo on drums. In 2010, Kuina joined them on the guitar. However, in 2014, they announced that Kazuki, one of the guitarists, would be leaving and retiring from Visual Kei altogether because his mom was diagnosed with a terminal illness and he was the only son, so he felt that it was he felt that it was his duty to go ahead and take care of her and give her the best life that he can. And to this day, royz is still active as a 4-member band. Well, actually, before we start, I do want to talk about this cover real quick. It's very much graphic design is my passion. Let me read the back of it, which is also very much graphic design is my passion. And I promise you this is verbatim. Bishonen is a boy with a pretty face. Visual Kei is the desire to appear as androgynous and be shonen beautiful as possible while expressing yourself with the most profound music you have ever heard. Love doesn't always appear in convenient forms, cultures, or times like we would like them to. Double space. When it happened, do we cast them aside because of others may think? When her tears save him from a certain death, he begins to live for her. This is the making of a Visual Kei rock star. Ambitious African American Sadie Bank has one desire: to become the best professional dancer and choreographer in her field, but sometimes destiny has other plans. Japanese music protege Subaru Choda was born a beautiful and gifted child with a musical soul too sensitive for the life he was born into. The youngest son of a troubled, promiscuous mother and a forced absentee father spirals him into a deep, dark depression that nearly steals him from this earth, until Sadie. Visual Kei Rockstar is a tale that expands a decade. No wonder this thing is thick. It is long. A decade? Over this expansion of time, these two most unlikely to be friends become lovers drawn together by a force stronger than age or racial differences. Through opposing forces, a dancer realizes there is nothing more to living by looking at life through the eyes of a beautiful young Japanese man. Through his love for her, a Visual Kei rockstar emerges, ready to take on the world to keep her by his side. Which side of love will you stand on? What rock music had brought together, let no man or woman tear apart. Now, I do want to point out that there is a dedication page. Again, I'm reading all of this. Like, any direct quotes that I pull out from here, I'm reading verbatim, by the way. A shout out to all the women who love the sexy, confident, and bold men of J-Rock, Visual K, Goth, Emo, Glam Rock, and any other label you want to stick on them. We know the real deal about these uber femme men. We as fans also know Viz K, which I'm gonna go ahead and stop right there. Visual K. I've never heard anyone call it Viz K. We can call it Visual K, VK. It's mostly shortened to VK. We as fans also know Viz K rock bands are known for their disbanding, which is actually very true. RIP Dataroma. So make sure you support them by buying their CDs and singles and show your love while they are touring. There is no guarantee that grouping will be together next year. Fortunately, your favorite music artist may move on to other solo/band projects and not disappear from the music world entirely. After it says that, it says, rock on in before the here and the after. Luna Sea, Glay, X Japan, Versailles, The Gazette, Matenro Opera, OZ, Desper's Ray, Moi de Moi, Nightmare, Yoshiki, Death Gaze, Muck, Maximum the Hormone, Girugamesh, Gacked. It literally says Gacked. Sadie, LMC, Dear on Grey, No God, Malice Miser, Dio, Miyavi, Alice 9, Ga, Kisaki Project, Phantasmor, I can't say it, but you'll see it. Kagara, Sid, Screw, and Kef, and the list could goes on. Korekara mo ganbatte kudasai. Keep up the good work. And that right there is the beginning of probably one of the most infuriating things about this book, is that there's a lot of Japanese dialogue in here that is immediately translated into English. Anyway, so chapter 1 begins, and it starts out back in 1999, where Sadie is in Los Angeles. She just finished a production of the Rocky Horror Show, and she goes backstage and she starts talking with her fellow castmate and friend Minako Choda. And as they're talking, we get introduced to the second main character, Minako's brother, Subaru. They talk about how Subaru is doing and how he grew up with an extraordinary talent for music, and they also mention that he won a music contest and he moved over to Osaka with his mother to pursue music. Which, by the way, royz originated in Osaka, so is this really about Subaru royz? Who knows? And how the two think that he's wasting his talents by being in a band with a pop musician, Ria Matsuda, who takes credit for all the music that Subaru writes. They also mention how Subaru is an empath, which is someone who can feel other people's emotions, and how Ria is just using Subaru for his talent, basically. And they also talk about the possibility of Subaru being in love with Ria as well, which is why he tours with her and why he lets her use him. And then we're introduced to another character, Marshall Horowitz, who is a director on the Broadway circuit. He asks the two girls if they're going to an after party later that night. Sadie and Marshall talk for a little bit. Meanwhile, Minako just kind of stands off to the side because she doesn't really like Marshall, because she thinks that even though Marshall is helping out Sadie, he just wants to get with her. Sadie doesn't see it, she just sees him as a colleague. Anyway, the two get a cab, they go on their way back to the hotel, and they talk about Subaru and catching up with him because apparently his band is performing at this after party that they're about to go to. Minako asks Sadie what she's going to wear to the party, and Sadie says something casual, to which Minako dismisses, "Your casual is considered dressy by others." And then Sadie replies with, and again, I'm reading this quote verbatim, like I did not alter these quotes in any way, they're exactly what came out of the book. Sadie goes on to say, "I'm a goth type of gal. I adore my corsets, pencil skirts, ruffled blouses, and vintage spiked heeled shoes, or my platform shoes." I also never heard someone goth describe their wardrobe as such. Like, Minako and Sadie continue talking, and it's revealed that Sadie was actually Subaru's first crush. We also find out that Minako is actually 10 years older than Subaru, and is best friends, obviously, with Sadie. And Sadie was actually Subaru's babysitter and dance teacher at one point. So Sadie is 10 years older than Subaru. And then they kind of start getting into Sadie's love life, and almost kind of out of nowhere, Sadie explains, and again, I'm reading this quote verbatim, Sadie just explains that she's laying the foundation for a spiritual, I can't speak, progression to conserve Qing Qi and transform it into positive behavior. But it basically means that she doesn't have a love life. She's focused on her career. Any man that comes in her way is just a distraction, so she just casts them away and just focuses on her career. We also find out that Sadie has abandonment issues from when her parents died and then when her grandmother died, and they tried to live with her aunt, and she didn't really like living with her aunt. But at the end of the chapter, we find out that Sadie doesn't want to admit that her never finding love is actually it actually bothers her. Now we're into chapter 2. This chapter starts out from Subaru's perspective, and already in just the second paragraph alone, it is incredibly horny. Like, very uncomfortably horny. Because it literally says, in just the second paragraph alone, Ria is, they're about to go on stage, and Ria is off to the side talking to a manager or someone. And it goes back to Subaru, and it says, again, verbatim, I promise you, these quotes are direct, and they're exactly how they are in the book. It says, his youthful body hardened even now as she cast him a sexy kittenish gaze over the older man's shoulder. Yes, she was just 5 years older than he, but her experience in the game of teasing and sexual manipulations was farther beyond anything he could comprehend. I don't know what to say to that, it just made me uncomfortable. And we find out that Subaru is basically attracted to Ria, but apparently Ria doesn't like getting sexually involved with virgins because they're inexperienced, and Subaru happens to be inexperienced. Because him and Ria work together, they're not allowed to date. And Subaru's manager offered him a prostitute for whenever he wants. However, he doesn't want his first time being with a stranger. He wants it to be with Ria, even though she doesn't want to with him because he's a virgin. Virgin shaming. And then we also find out that him and Ria were inseparable friends at one point, and when she offered him a spot in her band, he took it because he liked her. But in doing that, he kind of gave up headlining his own band. And as the two started rising to the top, Ria kind of outgrew him, and now she just wants him for his musical ability. She just wants him for his talent. Even though this was brought up in the dedications page, this chapter is when we get introduced to the many uses of Japanese dialogue, which is written in romaji, which is basically just phonetic spelling of Japanese words. Like, this story could really do without the dialogue because it gets immediately translated into English dialogue as the character speaks, and it kind of just really ruins the flow of dialogue between characters. And it gets really tiresome because it keeps happening over and over again as the story goes on. Subaru goes to his dressing room and meets with his sister and Sadie, and when he found out that Sadie was there, he was already backstage and he just bolted to go backstage to the dressing room. And Ria noticed, and she didn't like that. She didn't like that Subaru was excited to see another woman, basically. As Ria expresses her dislike for Subaru going off to see another woman with such excitement and joy, we also meet Yuya, Subaru's roadie and backup on the tour. Yuya is the only one that knows Ria's true colors. He makes an advance on her, and he tells her that she will reap what she will sow. Ria learned from a young age that using her sexuality is a will to get whichever she wants, and that she slept around to get where she is now. And that making Subaru fall in love with her made her heart a little happy, which the author calls her woman's heart. She caught feelings a little bit. Not a lot, but just a little bit. But not to the point where she'd actually be committed with him. She wouldn't be committed to him. Like, she would not be exclusive with him at all. And she kept him away from any sexual activities. Because, again, inexperienced guy, she doesn't deal with virgins. And if Ria broke his heart, he wouldn't write good music. And that she, and I quote, needed this, his talent, more from him than his. So Subaru is backstage, and we kind of get a description of what he's like, and I'm not going to get into it. Basically, he's just tall, lean, muscular, got really beautiful features, sort of feminine, but like in a hot way, I guess. where it's like nice and androgynous. And he's got a couple of tattoos. He's got this long, like he's got the shoulder length black hair. And apparently, Subaru isn't aware of how hot he is. And he isn't aware of the fact that, and again, I quote this, there wasn't a woman that didn't see Subaru and not immediately cream her panties. Very uncomfortable. And while I do agree that Subaru, like Subaru royz, the actual real person, is a very pretty man, and as much as I have loved him, I have never had that same reaction towards him whenever I see him. I've never wanted to be like with him. Like, yes, he's pretty, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. This part of the chapter talks about just how perfect Subaru is in both looks and talent. And again, another quote, even if a woman could resist his beauty, none could resist the alluring huskiness of his voice. Which, you know what, I'll give it to them. That's really why I love that part in Witch in the Hell a lot. Now that Rhea's seen Subaru's reaction to going over to Sadie, she kind of wants to get with him now. And basically she just wants to steal Subaru away from Sadie if Sadie actually really likes Subaru. To which at this point, Rhea, go to therapy. And then we also learned that Rhea has abandonment issues and that she'll just decided from that point on that she'll do whatever it takes to keep Subaru on her side, despite the fact that he can't do more for her than he already has. Anyway, Subaru's back at the dressing room now, and him and Sadie start catching up, and Sadie realizes that, oh god, he's hot now, and how Sadie, upon seeing him, felt a tugging from her belly to her. Too much. I'm uncomfortable. Anyway, they talk for a little bit, they catch up, and Subaru thanks Sadie for always being there, for encouraging him, and for not telling anyone, even his sister, the rest of his family, what he did. Which we can only speculate is some sort of secret just between the two of them, something big that happened that nobody knows about. Subaru pulls Sadie back into a hug, and it just goes straight back to horny immediately. Because when he put Sadie back down from the hug, she was fully aware of the erection as she slid down. We had a little nice moment, a little bit of wholesomeness, and then just ruined with that. Subaru asks Sadie for help with something that he doesn't want anyone knowing about. And he basically asks Sadie if she'll have sex with him so he can finally be with Rhea. He explains that he wants Sadie to do this because she was the first person to teach him a lot of things, and he wants her to be the first person to teach him how to please a woman. And Sadie, upon receiving this offer, opposes, but she actually kind of secretly wants to because she just found out he's hot now, so. And then the chapter ends with Subaru leaving to kiss Sadie before he goes on stage to perform. Chapter 3 starts out with Minako and Sadie in the audience watching the show, and they're just roasting Rhea's singing ability, and Sadie thinking about how to help Subaru without getting her heart broken. And in this chapter, something happens that I can only describe as atrocious. In the middle of Subaru's guitar solo in the performance, he steps down from the stage and into the audience and asks Sadie to dance with him. I've never been to a live in Japan. I've never been to a Visual K live or anything like that before. To my knowledge, that doesn't happen. That never happens. Never. Okay? Like, the only form of dance that happens at a Visual K live is just furi. Which, if you don't know, furi is just basically like little like synchronized movements from typically the waist up. It's usually done with either a light stick or with a fan, and it's just kind of like waving back and forth. And it's usually, furi is usually special to a single song. It's just kind of seen as the synchronized movements is a way for the audience to give a show back to the performers, because, you know, it looks nice, it's synchronized, it's cute. That's basically the only dancing that goes on in VK lives. And this book just kind of completely disregards that Like, Subaru steps down from the stage and asks Sadie to dance with them, and they tango right there, right at the pit of the stage, and it just happens. I was mortified when I read this. So they dance in the middle of the concert, right there at the pit, and while they're dancing, Subaru tells Sadie that he doesn't want to renew his touring contract with Rhea if Rhea herself doesn't want to be exclusively committed to Subaru. This contract with Rhea, among many others that appear later in the story, is very crucial to Subaru and Sadie's relationship as it starts. After the show, Minako and Sadie talk about Subaru and how when he was younger, he was misdiagnosed with ADHD, and that he was treated with so much medication because the medication for ADHD gave him so many side effects that his brain was just too much medication, and that he almost committed suicide when he was like 10 years old. And from what we can gather, this is the secret that Subaru and Sadie were talking about in the last chapter, and Sadie, upon remembering this, decides to call it a night and go back to her hotel room. I'm editing right now, and I realize that this video is getting really long already, and I decided to just go ahead and summarize chapters 4 through 9 in just one paragraph, and I promise that it takes away nothing from the story if I just tell it to you this way, so here we go. Basically, Sadie decides to take Subaru up on his offer, and they realize that they actually love each other and they want to have a future, but because they're an interracial couple with an age difference and a difference in career paths, they can't. This goes back and forth through all the chapters, with a lot of sex in between, very uncomfortable. And then we also found out that Rhea spent the night with Yuya, and that she asked Yuya to convince Subaru to sign on to her next tour, and that if he does that, then Yuya can have Rhea whenever he wants. Pretty much it. Chapter 10. Here we go. Chapter 10, they're in their hotel room, and they finally actually start doing it. After they're done, Subaru starts thinking about his future with Sadie and how he can become a visual kei musician, and then we stumble onto the glorious page that got this book to blow up on VK Twitter. Page 265. This is the reason why a lot of people were like, ew, who wrote this? Why? Subaru's thinking, and he's thinking about how he has to create a new identity for being a VK musician, and he just wants to play his music. You say something? Her dusky, sexy voice broke through his thoughts. A smile curved Subaru's lips when she placed a tender kiss over his heart. You're awake? Limbo, she laughed with ease. How are you doing? She looked up at him, resting her chin on her hand upon his chest. You okay? He knew what she was asking. His face heated, and he smiled so hard his jaw ached, but he couldn't wipe the satisfied grin from his face. Wa nani mo shitakune. He cocked an eyebrow. And massaged her scalp with his fingers. I'm not worth shit about now, he said. Every bone in my body is relaxed. Sadie gave him a doubtful look. Except that brain of yours, she said. I can see it in your eyes. You're overthinking things. Is it music you're hearing or something else? And then they just go back to doing it. Hi, I'm back. I just decided that I'll summarize chapters 11 through 15 real quick just to save some time. Sadie thinks that Subaru needs to experience more women, and then Subaru indirectly asks Sadie to marry him. She says no. They argue for a little bit because they both agree that if Subaru wants to marry her, then he should give up parts of his career, and he's willing to. They basically fight because they're on the same page about something. Kind of weird. Anyway, they go back to New York for an engagement party. They run into Marshall. Subaru gets jealous. Sadie doesn't like it, and she ends the relationship, but they get back together anyway. And then Subaru's mom finds out that they're together, and then she decides that she must break the two apart. Chapter 16, here we go. Chapter 16, Sadie and Hiroko are at lunch. We start talking about Subaru, and Hiroko tells Sadie to let her son go. Even though Sadie tells her that she told him that her career comes first, and felt that so should his. Subaru's mom then reveals that he has an audition to become a guitar player in a house band in New York so he can be with Sadie, and that he still hasn't accepted Rhea's contract. Subaru's mom then asks Sadie for her help to get him to sign the contracts and get Subaru back on track. Sadie asks his mom how, and his mom tells her to break his heart. And she tells Sadie that if she really loves him, to let him go. Sadie obviously doesn't want to do this, she doesn't want to hurt Subaru, but she's like, okay, leave it to me. Subaru meets up with his bandmates and convinces them to sign the contract so they can go solo, and tells them about his plans after touring with Rhea. Because apparently in this contract, they can tour with Rhea, but they can also work on their own solo projects as well. Anyway, while they're there, Subaru gets a text from Sadie, and it's directed for Marshall to tell him to come over and spend the night with her. And then Sadie sends another text to Subaru, directed at Subaru, and tells her, like, sorry, can't do it tonight, love you forever, see you next time. Of course, we know that this text is fake, like, Sadie isn't really with Marshall. Subaru immediately rushes over to Sadie's place, and Sadie plays along with, you know, Marshall being there, even though he's not, and how the relationship between her and Subaru was just purely physical. Before he leaves, he gives Sadie a custom engraved bracelet with a card that says, no matter what, he will always love her and miss her and wait for her. And even now, if Sadie told him the truth, that all this was fake because her mother asked for it, he wouldn't believe Sadie, because now he thinks that she's a liar. Chapter 17, fast forward 10 years, they're in Sendai, Japan. Minako is pregnant and she's about to have her baby. Due date is soon, and it will actually be her second child. Her first child, Hiroko Rose, nicknamed Rosie, was actually adopted. We found out that there's a woman moving back to Tokyo after apparently the death of her American director husband. Hiroko, Subaru's mom, says that the woman's husband was in business with some shady people and he had a bunch of debt, and that the woman decided to move to Tokyo to avoid said debt. We now learn that Subaru is successful and wealthy as a VK artist, and that he apparently needs another choreographer to help with his tour because Minako is just too pregnant and can't do anything. But he can't find one because now he's being described as a tyrant to work for. So we can just assume that after this man got his heart broken, his personality did a full 180, and that he's just not the same as he was before. We also found out that after he and Sadie broke up, that he did date Rhea for a little bit. And this part gets kind of confusing because Hiroko, Subaru's mom, brings up Sadie as a potential choreographer, and Minako rejects the idea, saying that Sadie is too focused on wanting to marry Marshall. And I was very confused because I thought Marshall had died. I thought that the woman that they were talking about, whose director husband died, was Sadie, and that her reason for coming here was to avoid the debt that Marshall left behind. I was very confused because it's apparently not the case. The mom admits that she did interfere with Subaru and Sadie's relationship, and that she lied to Sadie and told her that Subaru refused to accept work outside of the US because of her, and then told her to break his heart. And then after doing some further reading, we found out that the woman in the beginning was actually Rhea. She married the nameless American director with debt. Subaru's mom was actually sending money to Rhea in America in exchange for her silence about her and Subaru's affair at the time. The mom tells Minako to tell Sadie to accept Subaru's choreographer job, which I find very weird because there's no choreographed dances in Visual K lives and touring. Like, again, just to reiterate this, there's no dancing or choreography or anything like that. I mean, you can look up like Malice Miser's shows and you'll see that they do have like some actors or like people standing in the background, but it's never like a full-on like choreographed dance. And also I want to mention that other than the tango that they do in chapter 3, it's never specified what kind of dancing they do. It's just dancing. It's never specified what kind of dancing goes on or is supposed to go on in these VK lives. The mom then tells Minako that if Sadie sees Subaru, they'll fall in love again because Sadie is still in love with him. Now it shifts
Just
over
as
to
I thought.
We found out that Marshall
Trash.
is just as I thought. trash. And despite achieving all of her career goals, Sadie is unhappy with Marshall. And she just cannot stop thinking about Subaru. Marshall proves that he is garbage once again when he extends his current Broadway show for another 2 years and postpones a trip to Japan and their wedding. Marshall and Sadie argue for a little bit, and Marshall tells her that she's too much and a bad reflection of him and his production company. She tells him that she would leave him and any other man to have Subaru back in her life. And then she decides to leave him. She goes over to Japan to help Minako with the baby and accept the choreographer job and leaves Marshall. Chapter 18, they're now in Japan. Subaru is talking on the phone to his mom and sister. He refuses to go inside and actually greet Sadie because he says he doesn't trust her anymore. Let me also note that apparently with his new VK persona, he is deemed the Asian Archangel of Rock. They also bring back the dancers being an important part of the tour, which again, I don't know how else to reiterate this. There's no dancing in VK Lives. Again, closest thing we've probably seen was background actors in a Malice Miser Live, but never a full-on choreographed dance sequence. It just isn't a thing, I promise you. There's no dancing in VK. You can dance to VK. There's no dancing at VK Lives. It's not a thing. Anyway, still talking on the phone, his mom and sister agree that Subaru just needs to suck it up and work with Sadie. And this conversation just goes on and on for pages, and they also just talk about his career, and it just keeps going on and on. It doesn't really add anything to the story, it's just them having a really long conversation, and it just kind of feels like filler. And then Subaru just ends the phone call and tries to leave and avoid Sadie, but she sees him, calls him over, and confesses that she still loves him. Chapter 19, Subaru doesn't believe that Sadie genuinely loves him, and that he wants nothing to do with her, just to work professionally. The mom finds out that Sadie is no longer engaged to Marshall, and the mom apologizes to Sadie for making her break Subaru's heart and tell her that she needs to keep Rhea away from him, because they find out that Rhea's husband stole from people who had ties to the Yakuza, and they want to use Subaru's record company that he wants by himself to launder their finances. The mom asks for Sadie's help with Subaru while she deals with Rhea. Sadie asks her to just drop Rhea and tell her to fend for herself, but the mom tells her this family secret, that she can't leave Rhea to fend for herself because Minako's adopted daughter is actually Rhea's daughter, and the father is Subaru. And the only people who know are Rhea, the mom, and now Sadie. Hi again. I'm going to summarize chapters 20 to 23 real quick because only 2 things happened, but it's just filled with so much of what we already know from before. So I'm just going to summarize that real quick. Sadie stays with Subaru until the tour starts. He acts mean to her until he realizes that, you know what, I kind of actually love her, when he starts remembering the time that they had together. And then he asks her to marry him. Sadie then tells Subaru that his daughter with Rhea is actually alive because Rhea apparently told Subaru that the baby died. Sadie and Subaru get married, and then chapter 24 begins. That's it. Chapter 24, Sadie and Subaru are living their cute little married couple life. Subaru goes off to work, and Sadie decides to stay home and work on the choreography for the tour. And out of nowhere, Marshall, who we can just assume is drunk because he reeks of alcohol, shows up, and he reveals that he actually paid Rhea to get pregnant and keep Subaru away from Sadie so that Marshall, could have Sadie all to himself. And Marshall tells Sadie that if Rhea couldn't get pregnant by Subaru, to find someone else who will make her pregnant and pass the baby off as Subaru's. Marshall then leaves, and Sadie calls Yuya to ask for help determining whether or not Subaru is the real father of Rhea's child. Yuya and Sadie go over to Rhea's hotel room, and they find her dead. This part really just came out of nowhere. Yuya tells her that they need to leave for fear of ruining their public image. Sadie's still adamant that they need to stay here and figure things out. Yuya, finally fed up with Sadie, starts talking about how tenacious Rhea was, and to look where it got her. And he starts talking about how he loved her and how she used him to get Subaru back, and she used him to make her pregnant. Yuya is the real father, and that finally Yuya killed Rhea. And he did it so she wouldn't ruin Subaru or his life. Sadie makes a run for it, but Yuya catches her and starts slamming her head onto the floor. Yikes. We get taken over to the hospital a while later because apparently Subaru had an allergic reaction to some soup. He was looking for Sadie and asked his friends at the hospital to help him get in touch with Minako's husband George to see if he knows anything that happened. Subaru has a bad feeling about the situation and falls right back asleep from the medication. And then we're taken back to the prologue where Sadie is in the car accident happened, and she possibly killed someone. We're taken back to the hospital where Sadie's in a coma. It's been a month, and Subaru's lawyer comes and tells him that Yuya killed Ria and then later killed himself. And then the chapter ends with Subaru crying to his wife the same way she cried to him when he almost took his own life. And then there's an epilogue. The epilogue takes place in December of that year at one of Subaru's shows in Tokyo. Subaru performs and realizes that he's achieved all of his dreams right before his 30th birthday. In his performance, he sings, okay. He strips a little bit, kind of weird but not unusual at a VK show. And then he gets ready to perform the dance sequence coming up.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? I love
not knowing how VK lives work.
And the dance performance is described as two angels that dance their way over to each other, but then Subaru gets in the middle and they all perform the synchronized dance together. And after the show, the crowd is chanting for an encore, and Subaru declines because he thinks that tonight will be the night Sadie wakes up from her coma. She does. Subaru says he wants to start a family with Sadie. She agrees. They kiss. That's the end of the story. I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of a very unsatisfying ending. There is also an author's note in this explaining the VK scene, but there's also a page about the author herself. I'm going ahead and read that before we get to the actual author's note. Page what the author says: interracial relationships with action, romance, humor, and emotions rolled into one memorable tale have become a trademark. Alabama native Cherie McCarver is also known for the refreshing change of utilizing Asian men in the role of heroes for Black women. She was acclaimed for her firsts, such as her Elizabethan Roman novel The Lord and the Scorpion, being the first to feature a full-length love story with an English lord and a Black female heroine. Also the first to write a contemporary May/December romance story featuring a younger Asian male lead and an older Black female lead in a J-pop love song. She rediscovered that laughter, love, and dreams are necessary for her daily survival, and she hopes she has expressed all three in her stories. Miss McCarver loves hearing from her readers. She can be reached at, and her email and website is right there at the bottom. It does explain a lot of why the point that Sadie was an older Black woman and Subaru was a Japanese young man is mentioned constantly throughout this, I was about to say movie, throughout this book. Which, of course, it's an important part of the story. It is probably like the main adversity with this couple. It does become very tiring hearing it over and over again. Like, we know that's a problem for them. It's already been established. We don't need to hear it that many times over and over again. We know that that's a problem. The author's note reads, "Visual K to me, I'll do my best to explain this because it's not something that is well explainable. Visual K men and music affect each person differently. It's taught me that it's not the clothes that make the man, but the man that makes the clothes, even if it is a Victorian gown and a pair of 4-inch platforms or heels. It's unconventional and sometimes Orient in style. It's creative style that usually involves dramatic makeup, unorthodox hairstyles, and costuming bordering on the elaborately bold to the elegance of the historical past. These men have the ability to exude masculine appeal with androgynous appearances, and they can write, play, and sing their asses off. Visual K art is called to the bohemian nature that cries to bust out of the conformist box that we are forced into from birth, and that is its appeal. The wave may have begun in Japan, but its cataclysmic effect, I don't know how to say that word, effect has surfaced way outside the borders of the Far East. Busy Muse has taken those of us who love it on an unforgettable ride of moral creative freedom. It's taken everything we were taught and set it upside down on its ass. Visual K to me is the purest form of musical expression and allows you to match the person everyone wants you to be and become the person that is hiding inside. One way for someone to describe what VK is to them, I don't necessarily agree that VK is just looks that are only based on historical clothing. There are many bands out there whose costuming ranges from historical clothing to traditional Japanese kimonos and such, streetwear, and the list goes on. Like, visual kei is not just Gothic, Victorian, or Edwardian looks. I don't think that the author really understands that, which is kind of weird because in the beginning of the dedications page, she mentions bands like The Gazette, Sid, Screw, Dear Own Grey. And if she knows those bands, then she should know that their styles are not always Victorian goth like clothing in VK ranges, and it's just whatever you want. Which I find kind of funny because she mentioned in the author's note that VK isn't meant to fit in one box, like one conformist box, but she kind of puts it in one by only using one example of the many different styles of VK there are out there. There is a review on Amazon for this book that I do want to call attention to because I do agree with a lot of the points that this reviewer makes about this book. It says, I have been in the visual kei scene for almost 15 years, and I do know what I expected. I purchased this book out of curiosity, and I will say I was thoroughly entertained. First, the good. I love that this was an interracial romance that painted an often feminized group as strong, sexy, and masculine. Fair point. Now the not so good. I'm not sure this author researched the visual kei scene outside of a few Wikipedia pages. I agree with that. The author doesn't include anything at all about the genre and its culture. True. She just mentions the band and one type of style, and that's pretty much all there is for visual kei culture. I also get the impression that she has never been to a show stateside or in Japan. Her description of the live shows is just wrong. Nobody stops to tango in the middle of a guitar solo. I have seen some of the biggest acts in VK, and not one band in the history of ever used a full-time choreographer or team of backup dancers. If you have ever seen any foodie, you know this to be true. Sorry, but these guys are basically too busy playing and singing their hearts out to dance or mess with backup dancers. From the costumes to the lifestyle to the fans to the pay, this book misses the mark by the wildest margin possible. I have to agree with that. I really have to agree with that. The characters are robotic, and truthfully I could not see them in my mind because there was so little physical description of them aside from Asian man with hair and black woman with dancer's body. And that is so true. The only person in this book to have an actual detailed physical description is just Subaru. The plot is derivative and everyone in this book is profoundly stupid. I hope you like murder mysteries solved in a few pages. Which, again, I do agree with that. They just threw in murder mystery out of nowhere. And I also want to mention that I didn't think about this till just now. When they did the murder mystery thing, apparently the whole thing with Ria, like the whole like Yakuza thing, just went away. It was never referenced or mentioned ever again after she died. All in all, despite its many flaws, I love this book. I laughed out loud multiple times and so hard I couldn't breathe. I'm glad I read it, but wow, if this book was a person they would love to play in the street. And in this review that said it was simply okay, it reads, pretty good read. However, this book was extremely long and personally I didn't understand the reason for it. I agree. Now I must say I love long books when there's a reason for the book to be long. I didn't feel that with this book at all. I didn't either. It felt like Subu and Sadie continued to go around and around the same issue. Yes, they did. After a while, I said the hell with it and started to skim for a while because it just felt drawn out. It was cute to see everything progress and grow, even though it felt like it took forever. It really did. It really did. Yes, so overall good read, a little annoying the back and forth about the same issues repeatedly. Signing off, it was simply okay. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on grammatical errors because there was a lot. Like we saw in that infamous page 265, the usage of the phrase, he cocked and eyebrow. It makes me to believe that no one edited this thing. And that was very evident when a character was speaking and there was missing quotation marks. Like, there would either be no quotation marks in the beginning of the dialogue or no quotation marks at the end, and it made it very confusing to read because you don't know when the dialogue started and stopped. I don't know. Overall, I think I'd have to say that it's not as bad as I thought, but it's certainly nowhere near as good as it could have been. The story isn't bad. The way it's written is kind of bad, though. It's a good story, like a great idea, poor execution, basically. So yes, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you can follow me right here if you want to. Other than that, I'll see you sometime next time. I don't know when. Anyway, bye. Thank you for watching.